So when Russia opened its doors to let American intelligence officers in, what it did is it learned our techniques and it still gave them access to our officers.
And you've actually, like, I've had John Kiriakou in here where he's talked about this a bunch. I don't know how much you and I have talked about it, but you and him, when you were on Danny Jones' podcast last fall, had a pretty intense discussion in the third hour of that podcast about the intelligence community's relationship with Israel and the fact that, like, yeah, on paper, our countries diplomatically are friends and we're supposed to do things together and there is stuff that makes sense, but then there's also things that seem to be in their best interest but not ours. And you both had the same experience from different years and different classes of going in, and like the first day at CIA they have the code red countries and it's like Israel, China, and Russia.
Yeah.
And that's, I know we all spy on each other. I know Britain spies on us. We spy. I get that, but like having them at the top of the list, that's a little scary to hear.
Hey guys, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It's a huge, huge help. Thank you.
It's because Israel's so capable. And this is a perfect example of us digging our own grave, because we taught the Israeli intelligence service everything we knew. And then they pragmatically also went to all of our enemies and learned everything they knew. Right? Where we stand on our, like, this is something I've never understood. The United States, like, rejects the opportunity to learn from any other intelligence service.
We do?
Yeah. Outside of the Five Eyes, we don't invite, we don't let ourselves learn anything from anybody else. And it's because when you let a foreign intelligence service come train you in their techniques, you're also exposing your officers to their officers, and you're creating what's known as a counterintelligence risk. Because now those officers that you just invited in could potentially turn your officers, right? They could make double agents out of your officers. So to avoid that risk, the CIA just says, you know what? We're going to learn what we need to learn from our trusted Five Eyes partners, and we'll just watch everybody else.
But Mossad doesn't do this.
Mossad doesn't do this. Very few other countries do this at all, right? During the war on ISIS, right? In the war on ISIS, the United States and Russia and Iran were all on the same page to fight ISIS. So there was all sorts of military cooperation.
Yeah.
There was diplomatic cooperation. There was funding that was being shared between these three enemies against one shared common threat. That was a perfect opportunity for us to learn from Iranians and Russians how they execute operations against ISIS. But we didn't do that. Instead, we celebrated the fact that the Russians and the Iranians were letting us train them in our techniques, because that meant that the Iranians and the Russians were giving their intelligence services, they were opening their intelligence services to American officers going in who might be able to turn Israelis or Russians and Iranians, right? That's what we think of as a victory.
You're saying we're thinking about it wrong.
We're thinking about it all wrong.
Yeah.
So when Russia opened its doors to let American intelligence officers in, what it did is it learned our techniques and it still gave them access to our fucking officers. So it could still try to turn our officers. So it's ludicrous when we think that it's best to block our own, like, not learn from others because we don't let them in, therefore we don't expose ourselves to the risk. When we still introduce officers into other training scenarios, only now it's a give situation only. We're giving them more information, we're giving them more access, we're giving them more opportunity. So Russia, China, Iran, Israel, Turkey, Germany, Spain, they're all learning our best techniques and the best techniques of everybody else they train with, where we're limiting ourselves to really only learning from our Five Eyes partners. And our Five Eyes partners may not share everything with us intentionally or unintentionally. They may just simply forget to share this thing because they think maybe we already know it, right? So when the Canadians learn something new, or when the Aussies learn something new, or the Brits learn something new, that doesn't mean they're guaranteed to share it with us. They might use it for their own competitive advantage.
And you think, like, say among the Five Eyes, there is somewhat of a trusting relationship there?
There is the most trusting relationship there.
But not, there's no such thing as pure trust.
Correct. There's a very famous quote that says there are no permanent friends or enemies, only permanent interests.
That's a good quote.
And that's our way of understanding that today's friend could become tomorrow's enemy.
Yeah. So you had said, like, obviously we have this one-way door policy that's not ideal for, I guess, like spy training and stuff like that. But you also said a lot of what compromises Mossad today and other forms of Israeli intelligence is based on what we taught them. At some point there, though, you know, the one-way door turns into them now using some of those to spy on us as well. And on everything I look at, that seems to have happened fucking 5 decades ago. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, they've been a major intelligence risk. Israel's been a major intelligence risk to the United States for a long time. That's why they're on the list of countries that we have to limit our fraternization with, our friendships with, when it comes to being a professional intelligence officer. That's the red light or whatever you called it.
Yeah.
We call that a non-frat list. There's a list of countries that we cannot fraternize with, which means you can't have a personal relationship with anybody from those countries. And the non-frat list is a classified list, right? So I can't talk about who is or isn't on the list, but the list actually exists. You can compromise, you can be pulled out of your profession for fraternizing when you shouldn't fraternize. And you can still have relationships with people from those non-frat countries.
But you have to report them.
Bingo. And you have to document essentially in detail every element of the relationship.
So you don't really have to document with countries who aren't on that list, technically?
Correct.
That's interesting. I would assume you kind of have to document everything. I
So
would have thought that.
it's just a different level of documentation, right? So if I meet
Special.
if I meet a Spanish citizen and we go out and have a beer together, I might report in like 2 sentences that I met this Spanish citizen named so-and-so and we had a beer together on this day. And if we become friends, I might only have to submit 1 report every 2 or 3 months.
Right.
I'm still friends with this person, right? If I have sex with somebody, now I've got to report that I've had sex with a foreign national. But I don't have to report how many times we had sex. I don't have to report in what hotel we had sex. I don't have to do any of that. With a non-frat country, if you go down any of those roads, you're talking about very detailed documentation because the idea is a non-frat country is one that is trying to potentially cultivate you for an intelligence source.
That would seem, hypothetically, if Israel were on that list, that would seem very operationally difficult during, say, the era you were around, which is in the middle of the global war on terror, which they're obviously heavily involved with because they're in the middle of that area of the world.
So you've got to remember, too, that anywhere there's a policy, there's always an exception to the policy, right? For example, Russia's under sanctions right now, right?
Yeah.
Not when it comes to NASA, not when it comes to space exploration, not when it comes to
Really?
space operations.
I don't know anything about this.
There's a carve-out. There's a carve-out. So we can still work with cosmonauts. NASA can still work with the Russian Space Administration. Like, these things are still allowed. And there's other carve-outs too. There's always carve-outs, right? Even in the tariffs right now, right? China has all these massive tariffs, except pharmaceuticals and high technology. We're gonna carve those things out, right?
A few donors made sure on that one. Oh my God. Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.